The day my children locked me in the nursing home, I hatched a plan to disinherit them from my entire inheritance. I would take my 350-acre ranch and $5 million from them. I sat in the hospital hallway and counted the ceiling tiles above the emergency room chair, 93. Because numbers keep my heart from breaking. To my left stood my son, Mark, smelling of new leather and victory, and to my right stood my daughter, Elise, smiling at her clipboard with a bag heavy enough to hold all the papers that needed signing. A nurse fastened a plastic bracelet to my wrist. "Welcome to Willow Pines, Mrs. Hargrave," she said, as if the word welcome didn't feel like the click of a lock closing. "I told you I'd go home after my checkup," I said, as firm as a bowstring. "You're home, Mom," Mark replied, holding a pen to my fingers. "Just for a little while, until the dizziness passes." "What dizziness?" I asked. My hands were steady, my voice was even, the floor was motionless, only their gazes swirled, soft, pitying, familiar. Eliza cleared her throat. "Last week, the doctor noted confusion." "You called me Aunt Ruth." "I called you Ruth because you were picking on me," I said. "I wasn't embarrassed. I was just angry." The intake coordinator pushed a stack of liability waivers toward the counter. "We only need consent for temporary care." Temporary. When Elise said the word, it sounded as if my bridges had already been burned. I skimmed the first page and saw the words "Financial Representative" next to Elise's name, printed in neat, crisp letters. How could my own children do this to me? I wondered out loud, because sometimes lies need to be accompanied by truth. Mark exhaled. "Mom, no one's taking anything. You're keeping the ranch. We just need help with the bills." "The ranch is self-sufficient," I said, "and you've never made it to dawn for calving time." He smiled, just like he had when he was a child, pocketing a cookie. "We'll hire more." I signed one page, the doctor's approval, and that was it. Then I tucked my pen into my sleeve. The nurse was already signing the folder with my name on it. She was methodical and precise. People like that have a schedule. Schedules have their drawbacks. The TV in the lobby was showing the daily farm report, drought, falling groundwater levels, rising land prices like a summer heat wave. For 5 years, my husband and I battled the drought, keeping our livestock and house in good order. He died under our cottonwood tree, his hat pulled down over his eyes, a man at peace. That day, he left me 2 things, a 350-acre ranch and a habit of writing secrets where only practical people would look. The orderly wheeled me down a hallway that smelled of bleach and lavender. I counted the doors. Not a prison. Not yet. Past the break room, past the sign that read "key card only," I spotted the camera's bubble and in the corner the reflection of my gray hair. Good. Let them see me watching them. Eliza kissed the air near my cheek. "We'll bring your robe tomorrow," she said. Checkered. "Bring me some shoes," I said. "You won't need shoes here," she replied softly, as if urging me on. Mark squeezed my shoulder. "Rest, Mom. We'll check the irrigation system and the paperwork." Paper. He tried to feign boredom. He dressed boredom in a suit. And somewhere beneath that suit lurked the tools designed to rip me away from the $5 million in land, cattle, and cash I'd accumulated repairing the fence. When they finally left, I let the silence settle, heavy and distinct. The nurse placed a plastic cup of pills on my nightstand. "Briefing at 4, she said. "Bingo after dinner, lights out at 9. "What time do you start taking your nighttime meds?" I asked. 10:30? Why? "Because people stop looking," I replied, smiling. She thought I was joking, but I wasn't. I pulled a pen from my sleeve and clicked it once. Glue bubbled along the edge of the receiver bracelet's underside. I slid the cap under it and lifted it, just enough to cover something later. Not now. First, I need a map. Every building has its own rhythm: deliveries, rounds, trash pickup, smoke breaks. If you master the rhythm, you can hit the beat. A laundry cart rumbled past my door. The woman pushing it had a lanyard with keys that jingled softly and a pocket watch clipped to her robe. Practical, precise, my ally. "Excuse me," I said, what's your name?" She glanced in, surprised. "Rosa?" "Rosa," I said, "you run this place." She laughed. "Not even close." "I've run a ranch," I said. "Anyone who touches the laundry touches the truth." Her eyes softened. You need anything? Yes, I said. A small favor, the kind that doesn't show up on a chart. She raised a brow. Depends. The garbage room, I said. Where is it? Rosa studied me for a long beat, as if measuring whether I was lost or pretending not to be. Then she nodded at the end of the corridor. Through the swing doors by the kitchen. Why? I hate waste, I said, and I plan to return something someone dropped. At 4, they sat us in a circle for orientation. I smiled and learned names. Gladys with her crocheted shawl, Mr. Turner, who'd been a teacher, a quiet woman named Sherry, who kept twisting her wedding band. The activities director rattled through the schedule. I listened for what she didn't say. When the pharmacy delivery arrived, Wednesdays by the mention of unboxing, when the oxygen supplier came, Fridays from the safety reminder, when families tended to visit, weekends she cheered. Nights sounded thin. Thin places let you pass light through. After dinner, I feigned drowsiness, then counted to 400 and stood. The cameras watched the hallway and the entrance, not the kitchen corridor, not the swing doors that bumped again and again when the staff pushed carts through them. I slipped into the noise like a minnow into reeds. The garbage room stank like lemons, fighting defeat. I ignored the bins and checked the wall. Pipes, valves, the panel for the dishwasher, and there, a metal box with a keypad for the side door, the one that opened to the loading dock. The keypad didn't interest me. The small clip rack beside it did. On it hung a bright orange card labeled Maintenance. I took it and tucked it under my bracelet where the adhesive flexed and held. I didn't need to go out. Not yet. I needed to invite someone in. The next morning, Elise arrived with the plaid robe and a carefully casual smile that showed her molars. How are you settling? I slept, I said. And I remembered something. What's that? Your 13th birthday, I said. We drove to the city for the dress you wanted, and you made me stop the truck because a turtle was crossing the road. You carried it like a teacup. Her eyes dampened, not with love, but with relief that I was still the kind of mother who dreamed in old photographs. You always made time, she said. We'll make time now. For what? For managing things? Ah, I said, the turtle of my estate. She flushed. No one is trying to take anything, Mom. Good, I said. Then you won't mind us doing this together. Doing what? A drive to the ranch tomorrow, I said lightly, to fetch my boots. Orientation lasts a week, she said quickly. Doctor's orders. Doctors say what they're told when the story is told to them, I replied. Would you like to hear the story I plan to tell the doctor? Elise stiffened. We're helping you? If that's true, I said, bring me my ledger. What ledger? The red one. Bottom desk drawer in the office. You don't need, I do, I said. Because the person who holds the ledger holds the truth. And if we're doing this together, we should both carry weight. She left without promising. Good. Promises are for people who intend to keep them. Rosa appeared after lunch, a folded towel over one arm, her pocket watch ticking softly. You dropped this, she said, and set a small leather pouch on my bedspread. I hadn't dropped it. I hadn't owned it. But when I opened the pouch, there was a thin laminated card inside. Visitor, with a peel-off back and a hook. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Someone forgot that in laundry, Rosa said. I didn't see which someone. Thank you, I said. You look like a woman who needs to make a phone call, she said, eyes flicking to the staff lounge where there was still a wall phone with a cord. I look like a woman who knows numbers, I said. Rosa, do you ever garden? I used to, she said, before 2 jobs. If you had an acre, what would you plant first? She smiled without wanting to. Tomatoes. Always tomatoes. Then when all this is done, I said, you'll have tomatoes. She stared at me for a beat, searching for the trick. I let her look. There wasn't one. There was only intent. That night at 10:30, they wheeled the med cart. The corridor sighed into stillness. I peeled the visitor card, stuck it to my sweater, slid the orange maintenance key card under my bracelet where it bulged against my pulse, and slipped into the kitchen corridor again. At the side door, the keypad flashed ready. I pressed the card. The lock clicked. Outside, the night air smelled of wet pavement and old leaves. The loading dock opened onto a narrow lane that ran behind the building to the parking lot. I crossed it, stayed low, and moved to the line of hedges where workers smoked. I waited, counting my breaths, until a pair of headlights turned in and went past. When the lights faded, I jogged to the far corner where the staff lot ended and the sidewalk began. I didn't go far. I ducked into the shadows by the maintenance shed and pulled out the little flip phone I had tucked into my robe pocket that afternoon after swapping it with the dead one in the resident drawer during bingo, when all eyes were on the cards. The working phone belonged to Mr. Turner, who no longer remembered his own name on good days but remembered his 4-digit PIN on a bad one. I called only once. "Cal?" I said when he answered. "It's Ruth." "Ma'am," he said in his soft, gravelly way. I hoped I was wrong. "You were right," I said. "I need a ride." "And a notary at dawn?" "Dawn is when honest people do honest business," he said. "I'll be there." We met where the parking lot bent away from the security camera's eye. Cal had worked my fences for 20 years. He wore a hat that had seen weather and men. In the cab of his truck sat a woman with a notary seal and a face like someone who'd read too many sad stories to be surprised by one more. "I don't need a signature," I said quickly. "I need a witness." "To what?" "To a key exchange," I said. We drove 3 miles to the old feed store where the owner still left a drop box out front. Cal parked behind the dumpster. I slid out, knelt in the dark, and pried up the corner of the last concrete paver next to the broken spigot. My fingers found the tin of throat lozenges I'd buried there 8 months ago when Mark first started helping with the bills, and Elise began arriving with a new folder each visit. Inside the tin were 3 things: a square of waterproof paper with a code printed on it, a brass key with a red ribbon, and a memory card in a plastic sleeve. The notary leaned in to see. "What did you hide?" "Proof," I said, "and a map." We drove to the ranch by country roads the county had forgotten. The moon lit the fields just enough to make the fences look like drawn lines. At the gate, I used the brass key. Not for the gate, that was still a chain and a padlock and a sign that said, "Please shut what you open," but for the small metal box under the fence post cap on the left. Inside lay another tin, and inside that, a second key. The red ribbon on this one was brighter, as if it had barely waited. The house faced east, the cottonwood whispered like an old ally. I let myself in and felt the air press against my face the way a house does when it recognizes you and lets go of the breath it's been holding. I didn't turn on lights. I moved by memory. In the office, I opened the bottom drawer and found the red ledger right where I'd told Elise it would be. Of all the lies in the world, the worst are the ones wrapped in good intentions. But the ledger is an honest book. It doesn't sway. In the back pocket, there was a flat envelope with 2 documents: a deed of gift for a conservation easement on 200 of the least arable acres. My husband and I had executed it years ago to keep developers from carving up the creek bed, and a deed transferring the remainder interest in the ranch to the Hargrave Foundation, an entity with a single purpose clause: to preserve working lands and fund scholarships for rural girls who wanted to study agriculture. I held a life estate, which meant I could live out my days on the ranch, run it, profit by it. Upon my death, this place would go to the foundation. My children would not inherit land to sell like extra furniture. They didn't know that. Yet, Cal whistled softly when he saw the papers. "You buried your heart where they couldn't find it." "I put my heart where it could do some good," I said, "and I left just enough scattered breadcrumbs to see who followed." The notary read swiftly, nodded, and pressed the papers back into my hands. "These are recorded?" "They will be," I said. "I made certified copies, but I wanted the originals off-site. Today, they go to the courthouse for confirmation of recordation and to the bank for the foundation file. Every lot clicks twice." She stamped a short affidavit acknowledging she had witnessed me retrieving the documents and identifying them. It wasn't strictly necessary, but it was another bead on the string. I slipped the memory card into my husband's old camera and checked the last file. His face filled the tiny screen, eyes steady. He had recorded a message the week before he died. "If you're watching this," he said, "someone means to bend you. Don't let them. The ranch is already where it needs to be. Our kids are good at hearts, not at handling fences. Relax your jaw, Ruth. Use the ledger." "I love you," I cried then, quietly, not like a woman broken, but like a woman who had finally heard a voice that fit the shape of her life. When I finished, I wiped my cheeks and put the camera in my bag. We weren't done. At dawn, I stood on this porch and watched a sedan pull up at the cattle guard and pause, as if expecting a gate to open itself. The driver didn't get out. He was on a phone. I knew that car. Mark had bought it the year he decided he was too busy for dirt. Cal's truck sat behind the barn with the hood up. We were not hiding. We were working. My son finally got out, careful with his shoes. "Mom," he called, surprised, irritable. "What are you doing here?" "You're supposed to be at Willow Pines." "It's a temporary evaluation," I said, "and my boots are here." He took a breath that sounded like a lawyer's comma. "You can't be here alone." "I'm not alone," I said. "Cal is here. He's changing a belt. And I've got business." "Business." He laughed without humor. "Mom, you can't. Look, this is getting messy. Elise and we spoke to an advisor. He says we should consider a trust for, yeah, the ranch is already held," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Held," I repeated. "Not by you. Not by me alone." "You can't do that," he said swiftly, then realized what he'd said and tried to soften it. "I mean, you shouldn't make hasty decisions." "Hasty?" I asked. "I signed those papers 3 years ago. Haste didn't touch them. Patience did. The look that crossed his face then was quick, mean, and gone. "You hid this from us. I protected the land from you, I said, because you treat responsibility like a coat you can shrug off when the room warms." "You're confused," he said. "The doctor will enjoy meeting the independent assessor I've already scheduled," I said. "And the sheriff when we stop talking in generalities and start talking about the forged signature you were planning to slide under my pen this week." He paled. "What signature?" "The one transferring agency to Elise as my financial representative," I said. "The one that would have allowed you to sell cattle without asking and leverage the land for whatever shiny thing you want next." He set his jaw. "We were going to protect you." "From what?" "From yourself," he said. "From probate, from taxes, from making a mess." "Probate is what happens when children can't bear to be told no," I said. "As for taxes, the foundation knows how to keep books. And the mess? You made it when you called me dizzy and treated my life like a desk to tidy into your image." He stared at me, and for a moment, I saw the boy who once cried when he found a calf dead and couldn't be comforted because he realized comfort didn't change anything. Then I saw the man he'd trained himself to become, and I stepped back from the edge of forgiveness because he hadn't earned it yet. Elise arrived an hour later with a woman in a navy suit and heels that sank into the dirt with each step. "Mom," Elise said, cheeks flushed, "you can't kidnap yourself from a care facility." "I signed in," I said. "I'll sign out." The woman in the suit extended a hand. "I'm Attorney Barnes. Your children retained me to help structure—" "No, thank you," I said. "I already have counsel." "You didn't mention that," Elise hissed to Mark. "You didn't ask," he said. "Enough," Barnes said. She turned to me. "Mrs. Hargrave, your children have your best interests in mind." "Barnes," I said, what percentage do you take?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Of the sale," I said. "If I sign a consent that allows transfer." She stiffened. Don't bother," I said. "I know the scent of fees." She recovered. "If you refuse to cooperate, your children can pursue guardianship. The court will—" The court will hear from my doctor and from the hospitalist who can't be bought with a brunch, I said, and from my late husband, who has something to say. I held up the camera. We'll play it for the judge if we have to, but we won't have to. Why not? Mark said, genuine confusion slipping out. Because I'm not fighting you in court, I said. I'm starving you of motive. Now, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet, a notice of revocation of power of attorney. I had signed it with the notary at dawn. Elise read it twice, lips moving. You revoked, but I don't have. You did, I said. It was the first paper you typed my maiden name on, as if you were remembering the girl you could still push. Barnes held out a hand for the paper. I didn't give it to her. I turned and handed it to Cal. Take that to the recorder's office, I said. And file these, I added, passing the certified copies of the easement and the deed of remainder interest to the foundation with my life estate affirmed. Then stop by the bank. When the foundation account becomes active today, Elise stepped closer. You're really doing this. I did it, I said quietly. Today I'm telling you. Why? She whispered. Why would you cut us out? After everything? I looked at her and felt my heart twist, not with anger, but with the ache of recognition. Because you cut me out first, I said, when you decided that my will was a problem to manage instead of a person to respect. We were scared, she said, tears bright. You fell in the barn last winter. You wrote checks to the church and to that scholarship fund. What if you gave it all away? What if you left us with what you earned, I said. And with the people you are. I took her hand and pressed it, once. If you want more, it won't come from squeezing me. She pulled back as if my touch burned. Maybe it did. When Cal drove off with the papers, Mark tried to block the drive. Cal's bumper was steel. Mark moved. The dust he tossed in his anger settled on his shiny shoes. I returned to Willow Pines that afternoon in the same way I had left, quietly, by a door that wasn't watched by people who believe old women sleep early. I signed out officially with the head nurse, who frowned and said she'd have to note that my children objected. I said she could note that my doctor had cleared me and that I'd be back next week to volunteer in the garden because their raised beds were suffering from overwatered roots. She laughed, then realized I was serious. The next week unfolded like a coiled rope let loose. Elise and Mark tried to withdraw money from a joint account Mark had added himself to with a form that looked legitimate if your eyes skimmed the part where it required my signature. The bank manager called me. I drove in with my attorney, a woman named Jordan, whose hands looked like a farm kid's even though she wore city shoes. And we closed that account and opened a new one in the foundation's name. We left $100 where the joint account had been, and a polite note instructing that all future requests be routed through counsel. They tried to list the ranch with a realtor who'd sold half-built subdivisions and called Pasture Potential. The realtor, a woman with a cheerful grin, phoned me to confirm details. I told her the only detail she needed was the conservation easement on 200 acres and the filed remainder deed on the rest. I heard her grin deflate like a party balloon. She didn't call back. They tried to schedule a guardianship hearing on the grounds that I was impulsive and vulnerable to influence. I brought the ledger, the video, my doctor, and 3 women from Willow Pines who told the judge that I had organized a pantry system inside 2 days and had started a tomato seedling schedule more precise than a metronome. The judge asked me a question about the easement terms other people twice my age would have bungled. I answered. The petition died in its chair. Justice is rarely a single blow, it is a steady hammer. But the true turn came the night I drove the back road and saw flickering light where no light should be. It was near the far north pasture where the fence line meets the old pecan grove. I parked and walked the last quarter mile under a sky so bright with stars, it made a liar of every city preacher who'd ever called heaven imaginary. At the edge of the grove, I found a small camp, 2 tents, a cook fire smug under a grate, a truck with county plates I didn't recognize. A man in a vest stood up when he saw me. "This is private property," I said. He puffed up. "We're surveying." County utilities. Utilities don't camp, I said. Not on easement land without notice. He smiled in a way meant to disarm a woman who'd spent her life without needing a man's permission. We mailed a letter? Where? To the trustee? What trustee? I asked. He gestured past me, and Mark stepped out from behind a tree. Mom, he said, not smiling, don't make this harder. What is this? I asked. Who are these men? Pre-work, he said. For the line. What line? I said, though I knew. The one that makes the land worth more, he said. A gas company wants to pay for an underground line across the North Acres. We get a fee, you get nothing complicated. The North Acres are under easement, I said. No new easements allowed. He shook his head. We found a lawyer who says your language isn't ironclad. There's wiggle room. And if the county grants right-of-way, the county doesn't grant right-of-way across private conservation land without a fight, I said. And you never liked my fights? He walked closer. The men behind him shifted, uncertain. Mom, I'm offering you a deal. We get cash flow, we stabilize your retirement, we... Stabilize? I asked. Do I look like a woman who needs a stranger's rope to stand? His mouth tightened. You can't stop this. I've already... He stopped. You've already what? I asked. And then it clicked. His car at the county building 2 days ago, his new best friend with the fake utilities jacket. You bribed someone? He flinched. Don't use that word. Because it's accurate? Because it's ugly, he snapped. And unnecessary. This is how things get done. You taught me to solve problems. I taught you to repair gates you broke, I said, not to break the neighbor's gate and call it a solution. The men by the fire grew restless. Cal, who had followed me without my asking because he has always known when I need someone to stand 2 steps back, stepped into the clearing. He did not look at my son. He looked at the flames and then at the stack of survey flags. You boys done for the night? He asked. Because there's a county ordinance about open flames on high wind warnings. There's no wind, the vested man said, and a sudden gust lifted ash and sent it toward the dry grass. I didn't mean for the night to end the way it did. I meant to put them in trucks and send them away with a warning and a promise that next time I'd bring more than words. But greed makes clumsy hands. The wind licked the grass, and the fire reached toward it like a beggar whose bowl has finally found coins. Cal stomped and swore under his breath, and the men kicked dirt, and I grabbed the water can by the grate and poured, but a tongue of flame had already darted into the brush like a child streaking away from scolding. We fought it. We fought hard. Cal beat the flames with a wool blanket. The men flailed and shouted. Mark stood, frozen. In the end, the fire died because the grass was short and because the creek's damp breath clung to the grove. But a line of black curved across easement land like an accusation. The next morning, I called the sheriff and the county fire warden myself. I did not spare names. I did not shield my son. The warden walked the line, took photos, and wrote a citation on the spot. The sheriff listened, jaw tight, because he had 3 cousins who'd lost houses in last summer's burn, and the words unauthorized survey with open flame read to him like contempt. He did not arrest Mark. He did not need to. He took statements and collected the fake utility vests and the card for the contractor who would be looking for new work by noon. I did one more thing after the sheriff left. I called Elise. She came, eyes puffy, hair pulled back like a girl cleaning her room because inspection was coming. She looked at the burnt curve and covered her mouth. Your brother brought men here last night, I said. He lied, and he put fire where it didn't belong. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear. I believe you, I said, and I need you to hear this. The foundation's work will go on with or without you. The scholarships, the land management, the garden at Willow Pines. I would like you with me, not as a beneficiary, as a volunteer, as a daughter who remembers turtles on the road. Can you do that? She folded slowly, as if the question were a chair she hoped would hold. Yes, she said, and then cried. Not like a person who had lost money, but like a person who had realized the thing she had been pushing against was the only thing keeping her upright. Mark did not call for a week. When he finally did, his voice was rough. "They fired me," he said. "Not for the attempt, not for the plan, but for being sloppy enough to get photographed at a site where no one had permission to be. Barnes dropped us. The realtor says we're on some list now." "There are more lists than grocery ones," I said. He swallowed. "I was trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to win." Silence. Then small. "What do I do now?" "You start with apology," I said. "Not to me. To the men you dragged into your scheme. To your sister. To the warden. Then you do something harder. What's harder than apologizing?" "You work," I said. "Not for money. For repair." "To what?" "To the thing you set on fire." "I can't fix burned grass," he said bitterly. "You can cut brush," I said. "You can haul water. You can stand at willow pines in the sun and turn soil for tomatoes. You can take orders from a woman in scrubs who knows more about schedules than any manager you've ever had." He laughed, a broken sound. "You want me to volunteer at a nursing home?" "I want you to learn routine," I said, "and respect." He came on Tuesday. He did not look at me when he arrived. He asked Rosa where she wanted him. She handed him a rake and pointed him to the beds that needed clearing. He worked all morning. He did not complain except once when a thorn ran its lesson into his palm. He kept coming. He kept his head down. A man who learns to tend tomatoes learns to watch quietly. The court hearing from the guardianship petition came and went with a 30-minute calendar and a 2-minute ruling. The judge looked at me and asked how many cows I expected to calve this season. I said 47 and a surprise. He smiled. "Case dismissed," he said. "Mrs. Hargrave, you seem more than capable of making decisions. Children, speak to your mother, not at her." I walked out into cold sun and felt, for the first time in months, that the ground beneath me was not trying to roll me toward a cliff. There were still papers to file and accounts to reconcile and a locksmith to change the office door after I found Elise's second key on a ring that had a charm shaped like a heart. She surrendered the key without drama. She started showing up at the ranch on Saturdays with a notebook and questions that were not traps, but bridges. How does the water move from the creek to the field? Why cedar posts instead of steel? When does a calf need help, and when should a man keep his hands out of nature's business? I answered if she listened. She listened. I wrote letters to the girls who would receive the first scholarships: Maria, who wanted to study soil composition; Jade, who wanted to be a large animal vet; Priya, who had never touched a horse but had built a solar dehydrator from scrap wood and stubbornness. I wrote to them the way my husband used to talk to me after a long day, plain and true and without dressing. The foundation board, me, Jordan, and Rosa approved the first round. Mark asked to speak at the second volunteer orientation at Willow Pines. He told the men and women in the circle that he had once thought of places like this as holding pens for people whose best work was done. Then he talked about tomatoes, about how if you water them too late in the evening, the leaves spot, and how if you plant basil between the rows, it smells like hope. He didn't use a single big word. He didn't need to. On the first truly hot day of summer, the cottonwood cast a shade so thick it felt like a roof. Elise and Mark stood under it with me. We watched a heifer labor and then lie still, exhausted. Cal crouched beside her and murmured low, as he always does, and when he reached in to ease a shoulder through the world, Mark looked away, then forced himself to look back. The calf slid free, shook its head, made a surprise sound that has made me cry every spring for 50 years. We stood and breathed with them, the two of them and me, 3 people with blood in common and a history we were still deciding how to carry. That night, the phone rang. A woman's voice asked for me. "I'm from the gas company," she said. "We'd like to revisit a proposal." "No," I said. "We can be generous," she said. "You already tried generous with my son," I said. "Try legal, try ethical, try somewhere else." She hung up without saying goodbye. People who use money as a language never learn the dialect of no. Months passed, the ledger thickened, the tomatoes at Willow Pines reddened, the scholarships found girls who cried when they opened envelopes because no one had ever written their names on money for learning. I planted mint by the porch steps because my husband liked to pinch a leaf and rub it between his fingers and call it dessert. I read at night, not the kind of book that preaches comfort, but the kind that reminds you. Comfort is something you build with hands and neighbors. Then a letter arrived addressed to the trustee of the Hargrave Foundation. There are letters that press a finger into your pulse. This one did. Inside was a claim, a distant cousin, a man I barely remembered, had apparently found an old will my husband wrote 10 years before he died. It bequeathed the ranch to my descendants, with no mention of easements or foundations. The cousin argued that the later documents were executed under duress and that he, as a descendant, had an interest. He filed in a distant county where he thought distance would make me tired. I did not tire. I drove. Cal came because he likes to pretend I might need a hand with a thermos. Jordan met us there with a file so slim it made the other lawyer's box look like an admission of doubt. The judge was a woman, but that isn't why we won. We won because timing matters. The old will was just that, old. The later documents were properly executed, witnessed, and recorded. My husband's video spoke not as a legal instrument, but as a man to a woman, and sometimes, if you're lucky, a judge listens to the sound of a life and hears the cadence of truth. The cousin's lawyer asked if I would consider a settlement to avoid the press. I said there was no press worth buying. We drove home with the windows down. The road between counties is ribbon flat, and the fields on either side in late summer look like someone ironed time smooth. I thought about the day in Willow Pines when I tucked a keycard under a bracelet and told a woman with a pocket watch that I hated waste. In the rear view, I saw Mark's car trailing us, not because he had to, but because he wanted to be where the deciding happened. He didn't pass, he didn't press, he followed. On a Sunday, I invited them to the ranch house for supper. Elise brought salad. Mark arrived with a bag of peaches. He stood in the doorway like a boy who had come home late and didn't know if he was welcome. I took the peaches and handed him a knife. "Have them," I said. "Lay them cut side up. We're grilling." He did as told. He didn't argue with heat. When we sat to eat, I told them the last piece I hadn't shared, the part that mattered to me more than paper and victories. "When your father died," I said, "I thought grief would make me small. It didn't. It made me exact. I made each choice like a fence post, straight and sunk. You may not like the line I set, but it holds." Elise nodded, eyes wet but calm. "It holds," she said. Mark set his fork down. "I still don't like being cut out." "You weren't cut out of me, so," I said. "Only out of the part of me that can be deposited and withdrawn. If you want in, there's a gate. It's marked work." He laughed, not broken this time, and then he reached into his pocket and took out a small bell, brass, scarred, with a leather loop. It was from the first calf we'd ever marked as ours, the one he'd cried over when she didn't make it. "I found it in the barn," he said. "I polished it." I held it and felt a weight I could carry. When the first cold snap came, the creek threw fog into the low places, and the cottonwood tried to convince me to be sad about leaves. I checked the field cameras and saw a fox pause at the far fence and look straight into the lens like an old friend. I made soup and took a pot to Willow Pines, where Rosa had started a roster that read like a hymn: turning, watering, picking, tasting. Volunteers signed their names in pencil. Next to Mark's name, someone had drawn a small tomato with a smile. On my way out, I passed the intake desk where a woman was counting ceiling tiles. I stopped. 93, I said. She looked at me, puzzled, then grateful for a number that made the room less vague. "Is it hard?" she whispered. "Leaving home?" "It's hard to be locked away from yourself," I said. "But the trick is remembering the door isn't always where they tell you it is." She nodded as if I'd given her a map. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I walked to the cottonwood with a cup of coffee and the bell. I hung the bell on a low branch and let the breeze find it. It chimed once, then again, like a promise kept, not because of magic, but because people chose to keep it. Justice didn't look like a courtroom speech or a child in chains. It looked like land that would not be sold by a signature in a hurry. It looked like a ledger that matched the truth on the ground. It looked like a woman who had been locked in a place with bingo and fluorescent lights and had found the seam in the schedule and slid through it, not to run, but to make sure no one else could lock her life for her. It looked like my daughter rinsing plates at the sink and not flinching when hot water splashed. It looked like my son quietly filling seed trays while Rosa explained the spacing one more time. It looked like tomatoes that tasted of sun and salt and work. Sometimes at night, I ask myself the question I asked under the intake lights. How could my own children do this to me? The answers change: fear, pride, habit, love bent into the shape of control. Then I ask a better question. What did I do when they tried? And the answer is always the same. I remembered the map. I found the seam. I pushed. When the wind hurries across the pasture, the bell on the cottonwood rings. It sounds like a small thing. It is not small. It is the sound a life makes when justice holds.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting